A very good morning to everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my great privilege to welcome Keera Allendorf to the CFPR seminar series. Keera is an associate professor of sociology and international studies at Indiana University. She received her PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin and was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Michigan. Her research focuses on family, gender, and health in India and Nepal. She investigates how and why family behaviors vary and change over time, and how family behaviors shape well-being. She has published greatly and in very prestigious journals. Some of them are the American Journal of Sociology, Demography, Population and Development Review, and the Journal of Marriage and Family. So without further ado, Keera, welcome.
Okay, thank you. Let me just pull up my slides here. So first, I just want to thank you for inviting me. Obviously, NUS and your center are such a rich place for Asian demography, especially. It's exciting to be part of that, even from afar. And also, it turns out to be wonderful timing because this paper that I'm presenting, I was just looking at my analysis log in 2019. And thanks to various COVID daycare quarantines and closures, it's not progresses as quickly as one might like. But I'm just now at the point where I'm drafting the paper. So I'm at the perfect time. I'm very receptive to comments and questions and improvements. You know, I'm not yet at that point where I'm like, please no, I'm just ready to be done. I'm still, you know, ready to really polish this, and I'm excited to improve it and get your feedback. So please don't hesitate in terms of any comments for improvement. And before I get started, I just want a little thank you to my co-authors, Susan Short, Nancy Luke, and Hongwei Zhu. And then I'll also note that Nancy Luke is also the PI on the data collection, so she also played a really critical role there. So today I'll be talking about gender ideologies, as you've seen from the title. And gender ideology, this is not a quote, a sophisticated definition. This is just a sort of intuitive, that what I mean by that, are configurations or varieties of beliefs and attitudes about the inherent nature of men and women, as well as appropriate roles and responsibilities. So both like beliefs about what you think the world is like and what you think is good or best, and the inherent, you know, what are men and women most suited for. And these can vary across place and period, right? Differing across context, but also among individuals within context, and also they change over time. So the research question here, the central question is, what are Tamil gender ideologies? And as you'll see later, it's actually a more specific spot within Tamil Nadu, but what are the gender ideologies operating there? And then how are they related or correlated with some sort of basic socioeconomic characteristics? And this really contributes to a really burgeoning literature on gender ideology lately. And there is, of course, a long-standing history of research on gender ideology and sociology more broadly. And sort of the classic, you know, social science textbook of the last 200 years is this unidimensional view of gender ideology that goes from traditional to egalitarian. And as you'll soon see more explicitly, the reason I have quotes here is I am profoundly uncomfortable with the word traditional, but I'm using it because that's the word used in the literature. And traditional, it usually goes unspoken, unsaid, but it generally means men as breadwinners, men being more suited to the public sphere, women as caretakers in the family, more suited to the private sphere, and then men being inherently superior to women. And then egalitarian, men and women equally suited to careers in public and also equally suited to caretaking in private, and men and women being inherently equal. Now, of course, implicit in both of these is also not only a strong focus on the gender division of labor, but implicitly a presumption of a nuclear family. Now, along with that has gone the assumption or expectation of linear change, that in some mythical past, we all had traditional gender ideologies and we're all moving towards greater and greater egalitarian ideologies. Now, this is, of course, explicit in modernization theory. And modernization theory, although many demographers are still explicitly using it and testing it more generally, it's obviously highly critiqued and rejected, but there are more contemporary proponents like Engelhardt and Norris. But this assumption is also embedded in much more contemporary theory that's quite dominant in sociology. So, for example, gender revolution theory, which is becoming more and more used, also has an assumption of ever expecting egalitarianism, right? So there's been a lot of consternation in the United States and also Europe about this sense that the gender revolution has perhaps stalled. Or maybe even ended altogether. And of course, Goldscheider et al., they're saying, no, we're just halfway along the revolution. It's still going on, but there's no real structural reason given for why men will suddenly take on these caretaking family responsibilities like women. It's just the assumption that we naturally, inevitably progress to greater equality over time. Now, much more recent literature has really taken forward this multidimensional approach and trying to get rid of that idea of this linear or u-dimensional view of gender ideology. And it's conceptually, this multidimensional view has been around for a while, but it hasn't really been operationalized until recently. And with those recent operationalizations, it's taken off more. So we still have the traditional on the one end, but now we have often egalitarianisms, now plural, and different dimensions, and with the acknowledgement that individuals can be on different places on those different dimensions. I've put here superiority, work, public, family, private, but there's no agreement as to exactly what these dimensions are, although these are, some commonly seen ones. But just the idea that you can agree that, say, men and women should both work, but women are definitely better inherently as mothers, for example. Okay, so as I alluded to, this multidimensional work has really taken off lately, with latent class analysis being increasingly used in sociology. And interestingly, Yamaguchi, who looked at Japanese gender ideology in this 2000 paper, she used that paper to sort of debut or tell sociologists about latent class analysis. And her empirical example just happened to be gender ideologies, interestingly enough, in Japan. So, of course, the idea of latent class analysis is that you have these observable measures, and when we're talking gender ideology, these are attitudes and beliefs about gender. And then you have this latent class or classes, which in this case would be the gender ideologies. So you can inductively group individuals into these ideologies based on multiple measures. And this is similar to the much more commonly used factor analyses. And I like to think of it just as you're producing a categorical variable, putting people in groups rather than one or more continuous variables. Okay, and it does indeed turn out that when you run these LCAs, generally, although not always, you do get these gender ideologies that are multidimensional. They're not entirely consistent or lining up on that u-dimensional conceptualization. So I'm going to give sort of a lengthy example from the literature, which is this Knight and Britton paper from 2017. And this is not an accidental choice. This has really become a sort of a lodestar of the new work on gender ideology and its multidimensional nature more generally. And if you look at this literature more generally, there's sort of this burgeoning literature. Some people are sort of looking at how gender ideology is related to family behaviors and other demographic behaviors. But the biggest set of literature is sort of exploring what these gender ideologies are and are egalitarian ideologies increasing over time and keeping with that expectation of linear change over time. So Knight and Britton, they specifically identified gender ideologies in 17 European countries, which they term post-industrial. And they assess differences in gender ideologies across countries and also evaluate the extent to which egalitarianism has increased. So these are the 7 measures of gender attitudes and beliefs that they have in their data. And these are very common measures that are used in world values surveys the world over, the ISSP surveys, and many other surveys fielded often in the US and Europe, but in other places too. So I don't want to read them off to you, but I'll just give you a minute to read them. And just note here that these measures are, again, really focused on gender division of labor, work versus family, with the presumption that work is outside, a place separate from the family, and a presumption of a nuclear family implicitly. So Knight and Britton, they have these 7 attitudes and beliefs, and they use latent class analysis to identify gender ideologies. And they end up with 4. So the first one they call traditionalism, which is about 1/5 of people. And these are people who embrace the primacy of men and think women do need or want a home and children. Liberal egalitarianism is the sort of prototypical unidimensional view of egalitarianism. They think women should work and housewife role is not fulfilling. And then there are 2 more egalitarian ideologies. This next one they call egalitarian feminism, which is the idea that yes, women should work, that's good and how it should be, but also children and home are an essential part of women's identity, but not necessarily men's. And then lastly, this flexible egalitarianism, which is really all about choice, that work, family, whatever women and men want to do, that's up to them. Everything is equally good as long as people choose to engage in that. And in terms of the change over its time, they do find that traditionalism, as they expected, decreased in Europe over time, but which type of egalitarianism increased differed across countries. Okay, so that's sort of the state of the literature where we are in this. And this, as I noted, this is sort of a typical, there's a large body of work looking at Europe or rich countries, sometimes referred to as OECD, post-industrial, industrial, right? I'm sure you guys are very familiar with all these euphemisms that are used, and these euphemisms are indeed all used in these papers. Okay, so what's the theoretical contribution here? Okay, so multidimensionality, great, you know, a wonderful blow against this unidimensional view of traditional to egalitarian. But of course, we still have these implicit, sometimes explicit, modernization assumptions in this literature, which are problematic. Okay, and Wendy Siegel, I don't know if you guys read it, but there's the Population Studies Anniversary issue that just came out, and she has this very lovely way she talks about this conceptual baggage that we're carrying and we don't even realize it. And in this literature on gender ideology, this baggage is very much there. And I'm going to call these modernization zombies. So I'm not the first one, of course, to point out these modernization zombies and say we should get rid of them, but hopefully, you know, one more blow against these zombies. So one is the geographic focus on, of course, European, post-industrial, rich, whatever euphemism people want to use. And of course, this goes along with modernization theory that these are implicitly, even if we don't necessarily use the words, the developed countries where we expect high levels of egalitarianism, and other places we're not looking at because those are less developed, traditional, maybe we're not using those words, but we don't think they're relevant. Now, of course, any one paper, maybe they're just interested in Europe for whatever reasons, but when we see that, you know, there's 35 papers looking at this and only 2 that look at Africa and 1 that looks at sort of the entire world as much as possible, that tells you that there's something more going on. The other modernization zombie that, again, I'm not the first person to say this, is that ubiquitous use of traditional. And just last week, I actually went through every paper I had collected doing a word search for traditional, and I did indeed confirm that traditional is ubiquitous. I couldn't find a single paper that didn't use the word traditional. I did find one that only used it once, but it's pretty much throughout. And interestingly, no one ever defines it. We all just know what it is, and we don't have to define it, right? So this traditional is, of course, deeply problematic, right? Traditional gender ideologies are tied to the quote unquote traditional family, which is also deeply problematic as a notion, because there is no timeless, universal, traditional family, right? That's very specific to a particular time and place, and that is Northwest Europe and its diaspora in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, in roughly 20th century, right? Zenith of the 1950s. Okay, so if you go earlier in time in Northwest Europe, you didn't have this quote unquote traditional family of the male breadwinner, woman caretaker, right? You had a sort of a dual partner, dual householder, where men were the senior partner and women were the junior partner. Still a nuclear family, but they're both, you know, working around the home and agriculture primarily, or in other activities, but both working, not out at a separate workplace. And then, of course, with industrialization, you do have a movement outside the home. And this is where you start to see this quote unquote traditional family, which is really the male breadwinner, female caretaker. So I want to get rid of even more of that, you know, get rid of this traditional in general. You know, once we go beyond Northwest Europe and its diaspora, you know, even there, it's questionable in terms of timing, but as sociologists, we are generally looking, you know, 1950 onwards, so it's okay, at least in those areas. But once we go beyond that, it's really not appropriate. So when we're thinking about gender ideologies and trying to understand it more generally, how they function, what they are, how are they related to other things, why are these gender ideologies this way in this place, but not in that place, I want to think about them as varying across time and place, alongside, because of, but also perhaps changing too, right? Reciprocal causal relationships, in terms of family systems, culture, and socioeconomic conditions, right? They're not just a natural, inevitable part of modernization. This is not to say, however, that Northwest European gender ideologies are not relevant outside Northwest Europe and its diaspora, right? That culture has become dominant, right? World culture is pretty much dominated by those views. Developmental idealism theory also points to how these views about what is natural and good, and also can bring you health, wealth, and happiness through development, right, are spread around the world. And we could see rising gender egalitarianism in terms of gender ideologies, largely as a self-fulfilling process prophecy, that, you know, ordinary people around the world have learned these ideas, and they too think that, of course, we will naturally, inevitably become more gender egalitarian over time. And that's just inevitable in how things work. And you should change, get with the program so that you too can be part of this inevitable future. Okay, so zooming in more specifically to the empirical contribution, you know, that's sort of the overarching, theoretically, how we're approaching it. So what does Tamil Nadu add, looking at gender ideologies there? So first, it's a new context. with both similarities and differences from the Northwest European and diaspora countries that the research is focused on. So of course, not a nuclear family system, a patrilineal joint family system with a history of consanguinity, although not so much in the contemporary period. Also long-standing low fertility, much like Northwest Europe. Gender, male supremacy, highly relevant, but women's seclusion is much more relevant here. Big contrast, of course. And then, of course, you have important differences by caste and religion, which I won't go into all of those. I think this audience is pretty familiar with what a lot of those are. And then socioeconomically, certainly not as rich as, say, the United States, but within India, Tamil Nadu is a pretty rich state and has relatively high education levels. I was just looking in the district these data come from. Half the women have 10 or more years of education. And then another important difference in terms of the economic context is oftentimes work and home are in the same place, right? Agriculture is still very important, but also the informal sector is very dominant. And a lot of the work that people are doing, especially women, is done in the home, not outside in some, factory or office or other location. And of course, that also has ramifications for childcare. Another contribution here, as you'll see, we have a rich and large set of measures, and some are the same old measures that Knight and Britain and everyone is using, but some are also tailored to the Indian context. And to our knowledge, this is the first use of LCA to identify gender ideologies and its correlates in a South Asian context, to my knowledge. I'll also note that generally the South Asian surveys don't tend to directly measure gender attitudes. Usually, there is work on gender ideology, but it's usually using behavioral measures and sort of inferring that people's attitudes and beliefs, match their behavior. Okay, so the data. The data, as I noted, Nancy Luke was the PI on this along with Kaivan Munshi, and this is the South Indian Community Health Study, also known as SICHS. It was originally focused on getting data on tuberculosis, hence the health part. And this is a cross-sectional survey of about 5,000 households, and it's actually collected in rural Vellore district, which is in Tamil Nadu here in the north and just over the border from Andhra Pradesh. So, I'm saying Tamil, but, we're awfully close to Andhra Pradesh. And the data were collected in 2015, 2016 with an 85% household response rate. So there's 8,000 unique respondents to the survey. And these were ever married men, 25 to 60, and their wives. And then they also had a selection of female household heads. So we have about 8,000 ever married adults in the sample, and this is just everyone who answered all of the gender ideology questions, and there's 1.2% of the sample were missing, so not much. So just a refresher, research questions again, what are the Tamil gender ideologies, in Vellore more specifically, and then how are they related to socioeconomic characteristics? And we're of course going to use latent class analysis to answer those questions. So first, the measures of the gender attitudes and beliefs. So like the other papers, there's statements that were administered to people, and then they were asked if they agreed or disagreed. And these are 5-point Likert scales. So they could say strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, strongly disagree. And also they could go in different directions in terms of egalitarian. Okay, so now we're in our preferred conceptual world. So I'm going to use the word egalitarian to signal men and women are the same and should be the same. I'm not going to use the word traditional though, because as I had told you, I don't like that word. I will use the word essentialist, as you'll see, to signal difference or men's primacy. Okay, so I know this is sadly boring, but I'm just going to read out the 12 items since it's so crucial. And the order here is the order they're administered in the survey. Okay, so this is as the people being administered heard them. So 1, men generally make better administrative officers than women. Notice here the colors. To be egalitarian for this, you had to disagree and say, no, that's not the case. If egalitarian was an agreement, then it will be in blue. Okay, so 2, if both husband and wife work, they should share equally in housework and childcare. Women should be able to go to exactly the same places as men. Sons should take care of financial needs of elderly parents, and daughters should not have financial responsibility. Women should have the same freedom of action as men. Women are just as well suited for politics as men. Fathers should have a greater say than mothers in choosing marriage partners for their children. Higher education more important for sons than daughters. It's better if a husband works outside the home and the wife takes care of the home and family. Young women should be allowed to stay out late just as young men are. A child up to age 3 is likely to suffer if their mother works outside the home. And lastly, parents should give the same amount of pocket money to their daughters as they give to sons. So notice that you have the same number of ones that are blue and red, half, 6 blue, 6 red. So it's equally balanced in terms of the direction of having to agree versus disagree to signal an egalitarian belief or attitude. Now, 2 of these ended up having, they did not distinguish the gender ideologies at all. The classes that we identified there were like pretty much identical. So we just, for the sake of simplicity, since we have so many items, we've just taken them out, but you get identical results if you leave them in. We also tried the only other measure in the survey that gets at people's gender beliefs. They were asked sort of the standard questions about what's the ideal number of children. And as you can imagine, nearly everyone said 2, because this is Tamil Nadu and India in general. And then they were asked follow-up questions about what's the ideal gender of those children. And about 25% said no preference, it didn't matter. So we put that in, as well as people, and also tried a different way if they wanted, the same, like a mixed, but those didn't distinguish people either. So we did not include that one in the end either. So I'll just show results from the 10. Okay, so first we dichotomized the items and we coded it such that a 1 is an egalitarian response. We've also done the latent class analysis using all 5 categories on Likert scale and happy in the Q&A if somebody wants to know how it's different. I'm happy to speak to that, but I'll be showing you the dichotomized versions. Okay, so here is just the percent giving an egalitarian response to each of these 10 items, and I've ordered from highest to lowest here. And the colors, again, signaling whether an egalitarian was an agree or a disagree. And it is important to note here that in general, the items where egalitarian was signaled through agreement tend to have higher, right, than the red items where you had to disagree to give a egalitarian response. And I'll just give you a moment to look at that. One thing I do want you to know here is that the lowest at 12% is that the young women should be allowed to stay out late as young men are. There's one more mobility item here. Women should be able to go to exactly the same place as men, which is a little higher at 31, but they are both on the low side. This sort of vague, they should have the same freedom of action as pretty high agreement. And then the politics and the pocket money. And then the other family ones are sort of in the middle. Okay, so let's identify the gender ideologies with the LCA. So this is sort of a 2-step process. The first is to figure out how many ideologies there are or classes in the latent class analysis. And then once you figured out how many there are, then to determine what they are substantively. Okay, so we ran 9 different models saying, okay, say there's 2 classes, say there's 3, say there's 4, all the way up to 10. And then compare the fit across the models, and the best fitting one is generally the correct number of classes. Oftentimes, and we did too, you get pretty close fits. So if they're pretty close, then also look at, people say theory, but what that means is look at the substances, you know, which numbers, which classes make more sense than the others in terms of, so you sort of go over into this side looking at the substance to help you decide how many. And then also parsimony, you know, all else being equal, we want fewer classes. Okay, so once you've determined your number of classes, and then in terms of looking at them substantively and identifying, you know, what these, you know, okay, we have these classes, but what do they mean in terms of gender ideologies? We look at the probabilities of membership in the different classes for the different responses. So in this case, it's the probability of giving an egalitarian response to each of those 10 items. And we're just looking for patterns, you know, inductive patterns for these classes, both within sort of the, you know, absolute level of egalitarian response, but also how they compare to the other classes. Okay. And then characterize and name each ideology. Okay, so we'll go into this part first before we talk about the correlates. So first, how many classes? Okay, so this is the BIC, which is sort of the preferred fit measure for latent class analysis, but you get pretty much identical with AIC and other measures of fit. And as you can see, it's pretty flat after 4 classes, but the one with the actually lowest BIC is the 6-class model. But it is quite close, right around that. 5 class is just, you know, 12 points away. 8 class is actually just 6. And in percentage terms, this is, you know, 0.01%, right? Difference. So very, very close. So we ruled these out on the basis of parsimony. We also looked at them substantively, and in addition to having, you know, way more classes than anyone would want, they didn't seem particularly like they, you know, had a really strong substance argument behind them. We spent a lot of time on the 5 versus 6 class, and we did the vast majority of analysis actually for both the 5 and the 6 before finally, you know, having a very hard decision about which to go with. And in the end, I think that, and I'm happy to talk about, you know, why we didn't go with the 5, but the 6, I think, in many ways is clearly better on the substance. Okay, so what are these 6 gender ideologies? Okay, so I've looked at a lot of graphs where people are presenting these, and I've come to the conclusion there's no good visual. So I think this, I'm going to show you line graphs, which I think is the best, but it's, you know, the least bad is I think the way of saying that. So here, these are the probabilities, and again, probability of giving an egalitarian response. And here's the 10 items, okay? And what did it, how did, you know, why this order? I spent hours playing with these graphs, moving them around, trying to make it so that substantively it's made sense. So this is just the product of playing around in Excel, trying to inductively find patterns by moving things around in a way that it seemed to make sense. Okay, and one thing you might have already noticed is that the 5 items where disagreement was egalitarian are all here on this side, and the 5 items where an egalitarian response required agreement are here on this side, and as you'll quickly see, that is no accident. Okay, so I'm going to just show you one class at a time here. So first, essentialists, okay? So these, as you can see, these have the low probabilities across the board, low probability of giving an egalitarian response. generally 0.1 or lower, but a little higher, like the pocket money one, they're up in the 0.3 zone, and virtually none of them said, young women should be allowed to stay out late. Okay, so at the other end of the potentially unidimensional continuum, the consistent egalitarians. Okay, so these people across the board gave egalitarian responses across all of them, sometimes quite high. Right up here, they're up in the, above 0.9 and a 0.8 over here, a little lower on the, better if husband works and woman cares for home and the administrative officer, but still majority, above 0.5, above 0.6. The only place they go down below is the mobility. The women should be able to go to the exact same places as men, and then even below 0.5 for the young women should be allowed to stay out late. Okay, so the next two classes are mixed classes. Okay, so this first one, right now I'm calling them egalitarian seclusionists. I'm not 100% happy with that name. If somebody has a brilliant idea, please tell me. Okay, so these, at least for now, egalitarian seclusionists are pretty close to the egalitarians, especially here, right, on these items. These are more family, these are the sort of politics and freedom. But they are not, they are seclusionists. They don't think, women should be out moving around like men. And then they're also lower here on the gender division of labor and the administrative officer one. And here more generally. The next, again, I'm calling for now, but I'm not 100% happy with, is public essentialists. Okay, so like the other mixed group, they're very similar here. You can see on these items on this side, a little bit of space here on the administrative officer, but not huge. But where they tend to depart here is over on this side, and a lot of these are more about being out in public in the the political sphere, freedom of action, sort of general pocket money. You use that to go out and about and buy things in public. So public essentialists, and they're also pro seclusion. Okay, and then the last two groups are agreeable. That is what. So the first one, highly agreeable. So notice they're low over here. They look like essentialists over here, but then over here they look like egalitarians. Why? Because they agree to everything. That's an exaggeration, but they're very likely to agree regardless. So it's not that they're egalitarian about some things and not others. They just agree. The next group are agreeable seclusionists. So like the highly agreeables, they tend to agree to statements, but they draw the line at women's mobility. There they do not necessarily agree. They don't think women should be able to stay out late or go to the same places as men. Okay, so they're not agreeable, so hence agreeable seclusionists. So those are the six, the two consistent, the two mixed, and the two agreeable. So how common are they? They're just under a 10th essentialist, about the same egalitarian. So we have about a fifth that are consistent across the board in one way or the other. And then 14% public essentialists, 25% egalitarian seclusionists, so 2/5 mixed. And then, unfortunately for us, 2/5 agreeable, right? A third agreeable seclusionist and about a 10th highly agreeable. And unfortunately for us, because we want this to be about the substance, right, not about being agreeable. Okay, so let's move on to the correlates. The correlates we were at gender, age, education, religion, household income, and household primary income source. So here we took what's called the one-step approach informally. So we're just running a structural model side by side with the latent class, simultaneously with the latent class model with covariates. So allowing these one or more of these covariates to predict class membership, i.e. gender ideology. So we did both bivariate models where we just put one covariate in at a time by itself, and then also multivariate models where we put all 6 covariants and then look at the relationship of any one of these adjusting for the other 5. And then we have the results presented as the probability of members of each of these various groups holding the different gender ideologies. Now, one additional wrinkle, right, is that the gender ideologies could actually be different themselves. So, you know, the gender ideologies of men, for instance, maybe those are not the same as the gender ideologies the women had. So we did also look for signs of measure invariance, as it's called, for all 6 of these different variables. And there were tiny, minor differences, but nothing that rose to the level of suggesting that there were meaningful differences.
Keera?
Okay, so
yeah,
may I request
you to, may I request you to wrap it up in about 5 minutes?
So,
okay, thank you.
So, so multivariate, the men are very agreeable. The women, more egalitarian, more public essentialist. By caste and religion multivariate, no differences by caste really, but Christians more egalitarian and Muslims more essentialist. By age, really no differences once we have multivariate because they're driven by education with a very strong education gradient. Less agreeable, the more educated you are, more egalitarian, less essentialist. And really no differences, I'm just going to skip over these, by income source or household wealth. Okay, so we have marked differences by gender, education, and religion. And because I went through this so quickly, I'll restate them. The men are more agreeable, women more egalitarian and public essentialist. And the more education you have, the less agreeable, less essentialist, less egalitarian, seclusionist, and more egalitarian. And Christians more egalitarian, Muslims more essentialist. And little to no difference by age, caste, and class. Although there is some hints that those with formal sector jobs are more egalitarian. Okay, so what might this mean? So first, the mixed ideologies are consistent, right, with multidimensionality, but it's unclear, you know, how much of this is, you know, they think things are better because they truly believe they're good, or they're adapting to a highly gender inequality society. For example, men, you think women shouldn't go out because it's dangerous, right? I know when I'm in India and when I'm in Delhi, I don't go out at night, right? So you can't really tease those out with these items. The really strong education gradient and religion results do hint at Western or global influences and egalitarian beliefs that, you know, the longer you spend in school, the more inculcated with this world culture of gender equality being good and right and part of development. It also matches the few studies we have on sub-Saharan Africa and global Biparodian and Pandian that found growing equality views and also dislike of domestic violence that wasn't explained by sort of your usual suspect structural factors. It also points to importance of context, reinforcing sort of our original orientation, right? That the measures like the seclusion measures that are more tailored to the Indian context emerge as very important in terms of classifying people. The salience of seclusion or mobility is also, right, of course, matches the South Asian literature and especially the women's empowerment literature that really highlights that in the South Asian context. And then the unidirectional ideologies that we do get an essentialist class and egalitarian class, that does roughly match with what Western studies are finding, although of course, right, even our egalitarians, that's a relative, right, still they were not comfortable, right, with women going out just like men. And then the other issue is the agreeableness, right? Like, this is an important methodological issue that's really not come out in this gender ideology literature. And South Asia does have the highest levels of acquiescence bias in the world. So, you know, we're clearly seeing this here. So part of this is, you know, the culture of, you know, being agreeable and amenable, especially potentially to this high status interviewer. All right, but it might also speak to insufficient tailoring in these items, that people are just seeing these as, you know, not relevant to them in their lives. Also, less educated, more agreeable. You know, a lot of these items are overly complicated. You know, I find in interviews when I try to ask people these theoretically things, especially women that don't have high, you know, they just don't understand what I'm saying. Well, if we have this theoretical situation where this is happening, do you think this, you know, it doesn't make sense to them? So that's, you know, we need to simplify probably and ask real questions, not have complicated statements. And then the men, right, we saw are much more agreeable. Flash by you quickly. So our items, I think, are too focused on women. We need to have items more focused on men. And some of the literature is saying this, but again, it's really focused on sort of the Goldscheider, you know, more Western context. And we need ones for other places too, not just for assuming that sort of Northwestern European nuclear family. And then also, well, this might be at its height in South Asia. It's very likely to apply elsewhere. And one reason that we saw it here was because we had 12 items with balanced direction, half going in one way, half the other. And most studies don't have that. So I think they just might not be seeing it. So it could well be, you know, more broadly relevant, although maybe not as extreme as we have here. So going forward, in terms of new data collections, it points to having a large number of items with balanced direction, and also adding acquiescence controls to the survey. This one unfortunately doesn't, so we can't control for acquiescence, but other surveys could. And I will leave it there.
Thank you. Such a wonderful presentation. There is a lot to take in, a lot of things that are going on. So how about we ask the audience to share their questions? Perhaps we can take 2 at a time. Okay, Mujang, she has a question. Muja?
Hi, Professor Allendorf. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. And so I actually have a question about the correlates. And so it seems that the correlates at the time are all at the individual level. And so either about gender, religion, or about this socioeconomic status. And so especially for gender ideology, many of the times it will be a reflection or will be reshaped or changed by their like practical like gender relationships or family conditions, right? And so like I'm wondering, would it be possible, for example, to also look at the variations across family structure or the fertility status, right? And so like getting embedded in that very practical challenges, they actually may change their ideologies and may get their ideologies reviewed very differently. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so you could certainly look at, say, number of children.
Yeah, where the age of children,
the type of family you're living in. We do see that with age, for women, that would be pretty highly correlated with fertility. Although most of them have their fertility is like all at the same time. They wouldn't. So I was going to say it might be showing up in the age, which really had no effect, but given how tightly the fertility happens, it's probably not showing up there much. So yeah, you certainly could look at that. We have not looked at that, so I can't answer you the implicit question of how does it matter, but absolutely, that's a great question. Yeah,
but it's still impressive to see that how the education effects is very significant, right? Given this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah, thank you.
Prem, may I invite you to ask your question?
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Keera. I have a few questions, maybe a few comments / questions. I was wondering whether we still have in DHS a lot of questions about autonomy and so on. Can you share your thoughts on how they fit or not fit? I mean, we used to use that for a lot of our analysis, looking at sort of gender, not egalitarianism, but basically gendered aspects. But I'm thinking whether do they fit with this framework that you have presented? Or maybe if you can share some, how do you think that they are different? Because the questions that you have in this particular survey are very different from our traditional, I shouldn't use the word traditional, but our DHS and a lot of those types of surveys. Do you think there are some shortcomings in the DHS which these things help us to look at? And my second question is about the context of this particular study, which is in Tamil Nadu. I lived in Tamil Nadu for many years, for 25 years. For this particular district, there are a lot of caste dynamics going on because this particular district, there's one particular caste which is very dominant, and it's been very politically very dominant and so on. And there are a lot of other issues there. I'm wondering, and also in the context of Tamil Nadu right now, I mean, going back to your specific questions, because many of those questions, I wonder how could the respondents looked at it, because in the case of Tamil Nadu, the question about politics, because there's a 50% reservation for local election for women, which is, I think, I don't think any other state in India has a 50% reserved seats. Only women can contest those seats in the municipal and local election. I mean, those types of local things, and also the pocket money, I don't know how they translate into Tamil, because it's not very traditional that you get pocket money to your sons or daughters, right? It's, I mean, I don't know exactly how it was translated, but maybe things like that. And as you point out, maybe things could be because of safety, not necessarily because they don't want women to go out. I mean, if you can shed some light on how this particular set of questions the respondents might have understood, and whether that could have some implication on how they answered that. Thank you.
Yeah, so start with your first question in terms of measuring women's empowerment. So I think you meant, is this sort of another aspect of women's empowerment? Or just in general, should questions like this be included on the NFHS or DHS more broadly? So first on the women's empowerment, obviously I've done work on women's empowerment in my career, and I'm sort of at the point where I think it's just not a useful concept, that we've turned women's empowerment means everything, and by meaning everything, I think it means nothing. So that's why in my most recent work, I talk about decision making more specifically, which was sort of the aspect I was interested in. And obviously, given the dominance of South Asia in the empowerment literature, sort of decision making and then mobility are the two that are used. And I've come to, I think those are two different things now. They may well be related, but they're two different things. And this is another thing. This is gender ideology. And I really don't find the women's empowerment concept useful. And that's one reason I'm not even doing work in this area. And is yeah, by being everything, it's nothing. That's not to say the whole literature is terrible. I just have not, I've become disenchanted with it. you know, our endless questions about how do we properly measure it, I think it's because, you know, it's not a thing. It's not one thing. So in terms of, you know, would it be nice to have questions like this on the DHS? You know, on the one hand, yes, I would love to see more ideational questions that are actually ideation, not necessarily these. You know, I'd like to see questions that are actually questions. So things like, if a family has 2 sons, should they try for another child, or sorry, if they have 2 daughters, should they try for a 3rd birth, or should they stay with their 2 sons? Something where it's sort of clear and relevant, and you give them 2 forced choice. So in an ideal world, I'd like to see some that are relevant to gender in the NFHS or DHS more generally. But I'm also aware that, you know, they've got way too many questions in there right now, right? It's too long, the burden, you know, the data quality, or it's reaching a point where the burden is too high. But I do think, yeah, why are we asking 20 questions about domestic violence? You know, we could have some more, you know, take some of those out and put some others in there. So, and I'd love to see some gender attitudes in there. You know, it'd have to be something more widely than something that's just relevant to India. But it would be great to have some other measures besides, you know, the 20 on the violence, and then, you know, the focus just on mobility and decision making. You know, maybe we could look at 3 decisions instead of 5 and put something else in there. Okay, so the cast, so I pulled up the cast here just to show everybody who you obviously, it sounds like are the Tamil expert here. So this is the cast breakdown, which I skipped over since it took too long in the beginning. And as you can see, it's 39% Vanya, which is a other backward caste, and then 23% Pariyar, which is a scheduled caste. So those are the 2 big castes in the area. And then there's really, there's hardly any upper, there's 75 people that were upper caste, so there's really no upper caste. So the general castes here are other castes. So that is the caste dynamic. And, you know, surprisingly to me, so I should say, you know, I've been to Madras, but I have never even actually been to Vellore, so I can't really speak to the specificity of Vellore. That Nancy Luke is the one who's been there and would probably, I hope, have better answer your question. So how exactly that caste dynamic is you know, affecting how they're answering, it seems like it doesn't matter, frankly, because there's no differences by caste, and it's just Muslims and Christians that are standing out. And that, of course, that Muslim story is very fits with the broader all India pattern, as does the Christian story, right? There's the new work coming out, you know, by Nidya Menon and others, you know, using, you know, obviously there's Christianity in Kerala, you know, since before the British, but a lot of Christians are more recent vintage from the colonial times, and where they've instrumented and showing that, you know, there's less discrimination against daughters, for example, among Christians, which seems to be, you know, is based on that exogenous factor. So it seems to fit again with that all India pattern, rather than being something very specific to Vellore. And you know, there's basically no difference among the Hindu castes. So it seems like it should matter, but it didn't. I was surprised that there was nothing. And in terms of the politics, yeah, there was a lot of support there, but, you know, all India does have reservations, so it's higher there, but everywhere has reservations now. So, and of course, India has a lot of high profile, you know, not necessarily beloved, but, you know, Indira Gandhi, etc. So, you know, there are a lot of women politicians. So again, that might be more of an all India factor, but you make a great point about how, you know, that might be something very specific about Vellore, where they're especially positive about it.
Thank you.
Did you have any, I would love to hear if you had thoughts about, you know, what you expected based for the cast, or.
I think Vellore is unique because if you combine the 2 caste groups, more than half of them are Vanyas, are also kind of most backward caste in Indian classification. I mean, yeah. So so that's my thought, Ada. I mean, I was thinking because in Tamil Nadu, as you know, is also unique in terms of gender because of the Dravidian movement. A lot of 60, 70 years, there's a lot of women's rights movements and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, so made some of
certainly much more egalitarian than other parts of India, for lack of a better
Sure,
word.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking maybe you can, I mean, because you worked on marriage, I was wondering if you can talk about marriage a bit more, because that's the big thing, right? Whether you have choice to marry, who you want to marry is one of the key decisions, because the divorce is very difficult. You're stuck with your life, basically. So would that be a marker in that gender classification? Maybe it would have revealed something. Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah.
We have additional questions. Pook, may I invite you to ask your question? And then we have a questions from Lu Yang.
Sure. I thought like your point, I mean, these agreeable groups is very interesting. And I thought like, you know, your, I mean, I wonder if there's any interviewers effect. I mean, have you been able to look at how, you know, because especially questions about attitudes, right? Who ask you, you know, could influence the way you answer those questions. So I think my question is more of a suggestion that maybe something that you can take into account if male or female interview the person, and, you know, especially if people of higher SES interviewer people of lower SES, you know, I think that might, you know, that might show some interesting findings. A few weeks ago, we had a speaker who's actually looking at that, and he's at Lancaster University, and he's looking at interviewers' age effects on gender attitudes. So we could send you the link of his.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, yeah. We also it's wonderful to have that affirmation or confirmation that that's a good. We are hoping to do that. The version of the data I have don't have the interviewer ID, so I haven't been able to run those, but that is on our list to look at that. But my understanding, I haven't checked with Nancy on this one specifically, but in general on these surveys in India, you know, these people have at least 10 years of education. So they would, you know, my guess is every single interviewer was more educated than those who had less than 10 years of education.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think age.
I think that probably was
And
so that's one reason, that they're finding, right, the quote unquote more unequal societies have higher acquiescence is presumably because you're more, you know, agreeable to higher status, which is more educated people. I also want, I don't know,
Okay,
and maybe Prem could speak to this, but one thing I found, so where I do field work is far away in Darjeeling, but a lot of less educated people speak other languages, and then the interviewers are speaking to them in Hindi or Bengali or something, and they don't speak those languages, so they're sort of muddling through. So here I think everyone's speaking Tamil, but you know, there are a few scheduled tribe, maybe there's different language issues too, in terms of the less educated.
I just have something that you may consider. I think that perhaps it would be helpful to run the same analysis separately for parents of girls, parents of boys, and parents with both of girls and boys, and to see whether you know, these results stand, because I think the presence of, you know, having children may change some of these attitudes. So of course there is acquiescence because people are likely to report positively, but then when they have children at home from different genders, I think there might be something interesting going on there, and perhaps it's worth exploring.
Yeah, like the other, that's another important aspect certainly of family life. And
and we have another question, Lu Yan.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Prof, for your team's wonderful project and your insightful presentation. I just have a tiny question for your measurements of gender attitudes and beliefs. The first item. So men generally make better administrative officers than women. So I'm just thinking that if the answer from a man or from a woman, they may have different perspectives. So if we assume that a man answered this question, then if he strongly disagrees with this statement, it means that men expects women to be more suitable as an administrative officer than themselves. So which might not be that towards gender egalitarianism, right? If we completely exclude the view of what you call traditional gender norms. Yeah, so if we assume from the women's side, then the answer will be different. So I just suspect the validity of this measuring item. Yeah,
I just want to look at the. So I think so I thought you were headed to. They might think that it's men and women are better, and that's not an egalitarian view. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about whether it is gender egalitarianism or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. That could be that they think, they disagree. Men are not better. Women are better. That's certainly possible. Yeah, that's a good point. But that could be equally true of men or women. Were you thinking that that would be more true of?
I was just thinking maybe the answers from men and from the women, they have different meanings. So maybe we have separate the samples. Yeah.
So in terms of we did look at the whether the gender ideologies differ. So we did run it separately for men and women, and it's not different in terms of the gender ideologies.
I see, but I have no comments for the other measurements. I mean, the other measurements are all very.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right that, maybe they think that, disagreement is because women are better.
Thank you.
Great. We have another question. Vincent, may I invite you?
Hi, Keera. Hi. Could I ask a question about, you talked about within society variations or the role of education. So amongst all the different factors, is education the most impactful one? That's my first question. My second one is this. It's also interesting to talk about between society variations. If a similar study were done in another society, what might the results be? And I suppose the question is really this, thinking in terms of theory, what kinds of society would produce many gender ideologies, and then what kinds of societies few, and what kinds of societies, for example, would have mixed ideologies as opposed to either one or the other. So is there a theory about, how variations in societies and what those characteristics might be, might then impact upon variations in types of gender ideologies, number as well as the form? Thank you.
I haven't read anything that apart from there being sort of more than two, when we go into the multidimensional, I haven't seen any theories about what sort of numbers you would expect. And in terms of my view on it, or what configurations apart from the people expecting that just traditional and overall egalitarian, usually people are just looking inductively and then explaining what they find. So I haven't seen anybody sort of coming up like, this is what we expect to find, and then do we actually find that? But in terms of, I think one important thing to think about is we wouldn't expect, these are, even if we ran the exact same survey in Valor with the exact same sample and we asked them, 12 different questions, also gender related, we would get different results, right? Maybe we would probably get the agreeables, and we'd probably get like a consistent essentialist and a consistent egalitarian. But these mixed, I think, is heavily contingent on what items you have in there, right? So, what's the, you could ask about 100 different things, right? Which is not feasible. And what are those 100? And the 100 that are relevant in Tamil Nadu are not the 100 that are relevant in Zambia, or even, other. So I think there definitely should be some more theorizing along these lines. And we need to think, and this is why in the front end I said, we need to think more about how do these vary along, instead of just sort of assuming there's this natural, magically become egalitarian as we become richer, right? Which is, there's no reason to think that actually becomes true apart from this implicit modernization, apart from the belief that, it's socially constructed that we think that's going to happen, so therefore it's happening. We need to think about how, these would vary in a more systematic way. And I hope that this paper will prompt some people to do some more of that. I mean, obviously,
I actually wonder whether the same questions could be asked across
Yeah.
different societies, or is it so so much more complex that it would be not appropriate or suitable to actually use the same questions over a range of countries, say, because the context is so different.
Yeah, I mean, some questions would be relevant in some places and some not others, right? Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's tricky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So this comes to the end of our seminar, wonderful seminar. But before we leave, I do have an announcement. On 11th March, that is, Friday next week, we have a talk by Associate Professor David Reckhoff. He is at the Department of Epidemiology and Population Health and Department of Medicine at Stanford University. He will be talking about who benefits and who doesn't, identifying heterogeneous treatment effects of the earned income tax credit. Okay, Keera, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. We wish you the very best with your work. And thank you. Thank you.
Thanks all of you for coming.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.